feel free to ask each other questions and respond to each other. Who's starting for us?
You know, it's such a big question. It's kind of hard to figure out where to begin in that question.
Well, take a piece of it. Just take a piece of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I will say, and in terms of what's been going on in the nation recently, Tom and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, is that Trump had, I mean, I had been very anxious about some of the policies I saw unrolling under Trump, but the insurrection terrified me when I watched what was going on in live time with the Capitol. And, you know, many of you know that I'm the daughter of Holocaust refugees, and watching that was such a flashback for me about Nazi Germany and the Nazis storming the Reichstag. It was the first time that I'd felt really frightened because of my Jewishness in this country. And that was a real swing on the pendulum for me, because this is the country that saved my family. So this is the country that I had come to trust and see as, you know, it's what allows me to exist. But that insurrection absolutely terrified me. And I saw that our country could become something very different. And it frightened me on behalf of my grandchildren and the world they're growing up into. And I just felt the extremes of that polarization so much more viscerally.
And it came up yesterday because I was looking for some confirmation for my own PTSD, which I was thinking, what is this all about? And because it hasn't been an immediate issue, but it sure was. And I, you know, recall, I may have said this to the group once before, that when I was about 16 or 18, my father, who had left Nazi Germany in 1938, said to me, you know, it could happen here. And I said, Dad, you know, as a wise ass teenager, you know, it's not going to happen here. And then this starts to happen, and it is terrifying. And the fact that we can be driven to that kind of extreme, and it, you know, makes me feel a deep connection to what African Americans in this country are experiencing. So, yeah.
I'm wondering how this is all being experienced in Eastern Kentucky. I'm sure it's different, and it'll be really interesting for us to learn how, two levels, how you're responding, and then also how your community's responding, what they're saying, what seems to be the general nature of concern about it or not.
It was very frightening for me. I don't know. It's hard for me to speak for my community because of COVID. You feel very separated from everybody else. And I think that's probably contributed to the great fear, is you're separated from your family, much less everybody else in the world. And then, and watching that take place, I'm so glad that a lot of the scenes that we've seen after it was over was not visible at first, because I think I could have probably really been overwhelmed with fear, because it was, you expected any minute to see an intervention, to see, you know, some force putting them back out of the building and making things get better. And since it didn't happen in that manner, it was very unnerving. And I think most of my connections now to the rest of the world, like most people, I would presume, is through Facebook. And through Facebook, I can't say social media, because that's the only media that I have other than television and news and articles and on the internet. And it still frightens me when I think that you would expect to maybe to see people reject stronger, and people that have been supporting Trump come up a little stronger against what was happening and what did happen. And I didn't see that. And so that still concerns me quite a bit. And also that people around the world was looking at this. It was very frightening to think of how much greater risk we suddenly became to other nations, more powerful nations like China and Russia and other places. It's very fearful from every angle when you look at it, and I don't understand how that happened. I don't understand how that could have been allowed to happen.
Val, what's your experience and your sense of the community? As Nell said, we're missing out on interpersonal stuff, but must be some sense of it. And also you have extended families you're in touch with.
Okay. In particular with the events of January 6th and happenings with that, agree with all who said a scary time. I will say though, even somewhat uncomfortable in talking about it with our group here and how this may be used, because there are still, I believe, a lot of people in our community who potentially support what happened. I saw Facebook posts with hundreds of likes in support of and feeling a commitment to what had happened there. And in this community, I try not to engage too much at that level of confrontation. And here in the community, there are people, when I read their Facebook posts and their comments and how they feel, I'm bewildered. And I think that we could not have an ounce of humanity in common between the two of us with what they wrote, the meme they shared, the thoughts that they put out loud. And it may be that in the next day, I'm meeting them at the hospital, and maybe they're helping my mom walk to the car, or they're meeting me and helping to carry groceries, or they're coming through a food line. And I see that on this personal level, we have a connection. Many are family, friends, people I grew up with. And there's still a part of me that wants to believe, and I'm sure they look at me and want to believe too that we are good people. But there is somewhere a breakdown at the core, and I think things like the Facebook posts make it much easier to show sometimes our hardest and worst, and probably what should be worse selves. So that's straying a little bit, and a little bit of a ramble there. But the community is still, there are still plenty of people here who feel, I think, and I'm only projected, that they are pushed down and not heard, and have strong fears about the direction that the country has been and continues to go, and they want to shake and get the attention. That's what I think I see. For me personally, I feel like it was a horrible thing, and I don't proclaim to understand all the legalities and the laws of it, but what I saw seemed like one of the, nothing in my lifetime compares. And sending out thoughts here to folks who felt that fear. And I'm sorry that you experienced that.
That's not at all rambling, and it's also really beautifully put. And thanks for saying all of it, because it matters. It matters to people in Massachusetts what's going on for you and what you're experiencing, and it matters to you what's happening here also. And I appreciated your putting out your concerns to people in Massachusetts about this, and this question of what is good people, and where and how do you deal with someone who's helping your mother in the hospital, who's also putting Facebook posts up or attending demonstrations that are so antithetical to your own beliefs, and how do we hold that in our communities and as we meet other people?
Yeah, I think, Val, I really, I feel for the everydayness of these interactions that you have, and I feel very different kind of experience here, partly from COVID and partly from living in somewhat of a bubble where, you know, people in my community think mostly like me. My friends think like me. I mean, generally, of course. But that sense of hurt and sort of feeling forgotten and left behind, I feel like that is really bubbled up for me in a lot of our conversations over these years. And I mean, the extremists of this action we're talking about on January 6th are just a slice of people. And I don't want to think about all, you know, that being, I don't know how widespread that is, obviously, but I'd like to think it's still a small slice of the larger group of people. And until we address, you know, the real problems below the surface of income inequality and racism and white supremacy and all of that, really tall order. But I feel like there's, for one bit of hope that I feel is that this stuff is now kind of household language, that we're talking about these things that have too long been really left to other people, left to, you know, Black and brown people to suffer through, or to poor people to suffer through, of whatever race or whatnot. So I do feel a sense of kind of a rising together, and I hope that we can build on that.
It's nicely done. Gwen, would you add in to this?
Yeah. I do a lot of talking to folks that I meet and folks that come into this little bakery enterprise we have here. And I think for the most part, what I have been able to glean about what people are feeling in this community is they, you know, they don't share the concerns that have been voiced here as being the family members of Holocaust survivors. They don't have that experience or that analogy. And so I think a lot of what I've heard is that they saw that kind of mob rule that got out of hand in Washington as a sort of a Boston Tea Party type thing. And they just saw it as kind of a mutiny that went awry when people were killed and windows were burst out, because I think for the most part, people around here do feel like they aren't heard. And they did kind of resonate with that when it got rolling, but not the end result of it. And so that's kind of what I've been able to glean from talking to the community, because they certainly, you know, and until Debbie voiced what she did about what happened in Nazi Germany, I had not put that together in my head. I have to admit that that would not have been an analogy that I would have made in my head either. And so I just, I think when you're, you know, and then another thing that folks have said, I got a phone call from up your way, and they said, okay, what are people thinking now? And I said, they think the ranks of the Trump supporters have been infiltrated by troublemakers. And that was said too. And so they thought that somebody with a lot of money had sent people to infiltrate those ranks to cause trouble. So that's just kind of what I'm hearing from my community and the folks that I've encountered, who are, you know, and I've got friends from both sides of the aisle. So you know, the red friends are, that's what they're thinking. And, you know, of course, the blue friends are of a totally different mindset on these things. And we've discussed it at length right here in the bakery where I'm sitting. And so that's just, you know, that's the kind of polarization that is in this very community, even though a high percentage of folks here voted for Trump.
Well, sounds like you have your opportunity for your own little mini dialogue group right there in the bakery. Something most of us don't have, and maybe that's the learning you've taken from 3 years with Hands Across the Hills, that you can facilitate this and make people talk to each other. That's terrific. I'm thinking especially about all of you saying there are so many people who are not being heard in this country and feeling left out. And I think we've all been reading so much in the past 3 years, as well as talking to each other so frequently, that we understand that's a dynamic. And of course, the question is, how do you get your needs met? How do you get your voices heard? What's legitimate? What works? What's successful? What builds community? What breaks community? So that whole issue of feeling marginalized, which is true for so many people in so many different walks of life, red and blue, across the country. And what do you do with that? And what does our work teach us about that? Our dialogue work together also teach us about that.
I think we experienced that here when our Kentucky friends came up the first time. They talked about in the bus being terrified of what, not terrified, but, you know, ready to deal with our condescending attitudes that we're going to have to them. And that was, you know, very important. I mean, I really learned to be very aware of what I was saying and what I was putting out there so that it didn't contribute to that ongoing long history of people from the North coming down and looking down at the people in Eastern Kentucky. So I learned a lot from all of you on that, but it's also something that we dealt with right in our faces early on, I thought.
So in a sense, the experience has changed you in this way, made you.
No question. No question.
Well, another thing, if I might add, that that I hear frequently here, and you know, and we've discussed it at length when we've been together, Leverett and Letcher County, is that we don't exactly believe whatever the news is touting. We're not swallowing that hook, line, and sinker, because we have been on the receiving end of a lot of false things being said. And so, you know, we take it with a grain of salt when it comes across the TV screen, or we hear it on the radio, or even read it in the newspaper, or see it on the internet. And so, you know, I think that causes people, I mean, there's just a lot of doubt and unbelief of news media here.
I think that's one of the things, Gwen, I mean, that kind of relates for me to what Tom was saying about stereotypes and assumptions we made about each other. And one of the things that I think was so powerful about Hands Across the Hills, particularly that first session, but it continues to grow, is how once we got to know something about each other, so many of those stereotypes crumbled. I know mine did. And, you know, now I find myself in a position of defending my Kentucky Trump voting friends, you know, to my local friends, you know, because like you taught me why there's some reason behind that vote. And it made sense to me. But I think it really takes getting as close as you can to walking in one another's shoes to do that. And we have to know each other, and we have to be open to hearing and learning from each other. And, you know, for me, the overnights that I spent at your home, Gwen, and at Dom's home were earth shattering in some ways for me. They gave me a feel for what day-to-day existence and issues and the environment is like in a way nothing else possibly could. No matter how many books I read or how many videos, being there was just enormously life-changing for me. And it wasn't easy. I mean, there were times when it definitely was not easy. I had to really wrestle with myself because things didn't happen necessarily the way I expected they would. But that was a life lesson, and I'm just so indebted. And I think what it's allowed me to do is to when I meet people who I think, oh, they're different than me, or their politics are different than mine, or I don't know anything about their living, I try really, really hard now. I'm sure I'm not perfect at it, but I try really, really hard now to listen before I assume. And I really owe that to you.
Debbie, when you say life-changing, that's one of the life changes, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I came home, I don't know if I ever told you this, Gwen. I came home after that weekend and I was livid. I was livid that 15 hours down the road from my house to your house, opportunities are so different. Stimulation is so different. What's available to get engaged in is so different. United States of America, 1-day drive. And I just felt horrified and really angry that our country has ignored your part of the world and exploited your part of the world to the degree it had. I had to see it. I had to see it to know it. I had to take that trip through the coal mine you brought us to and all those things.
If we go a little further, what do you do with that anger? How do you work with it?
Good question. I think it's made me realize that I need to do more reaching out. I need to grow my circle. I need to reach out to people who I don't cross paths with just naturally, organically, to learn more about them and to share more with them and to get a feel for their experience. What else do I do with that information? Keep learning. I think I've put curiosity really high on my list for what I want to be in my mind when I meet new people. I know Sonia Sotomayor, you know, the Chief Justice, in her memoir, she wrote, I was raised, I'm going to paraphrase this, but it's something about that. I was taught that when I meet new people, the question in my head should be, what can I learn from this person? I don't have to like them. I don't have to dislike them. I don't have to agree with them. What can I learn from this person? So I guess I'm trying to hold on to that or embrace that more.
That's a great question for our group.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think a couple of things that have impacted me from this 3 years now, it's hard to believe, is that incredible need to listen and listen without judgment. And we have a judge going all the time. So that, you know, we say that and it's harder to do, but we have to work on it. And the other thing I think a lot about is how, you know, we got pretty vulnerable with each other and we had to get sort of comfortable in that discomfort. But that, to me, those were like growing places, like when there's tension and you try to work through it by by, you know, listening, trying to really understand what's at the root of an issue, and what's triggering that other person, or why there might be disagreement. And those are the really hard spots, but I feel like we have to go there. Like, you know, when you have a fight with your partner, you know, it's really uncomfortable and nasty. And I personally, it makes me really cringe, but we always do better. We come out the other side in a much better, healthier place. And I feel it is that kind of relationship building that we had an opportunity to do in this context, facilitated, carried lovingly, and we ate together and slept together, and well, you know what I mean. But we had good ways to bond that you know, people don't get in dealing with sort of the other, or you know, people they think are the other. And so many ways we found out we're not so other from each other. We have so much in common.
You know, I've shared this before, but I was just so blown away by the fact that Debbie just opened her beautiful home to us and just turned us loose and just went on and did her thing and took naps, and we just had the free run of the house and that sort of thing. And I kept thinking, coming from where I come from, I kept thinking, oh my God, how does she know that we're not going to carry off her things? You know, because of the opioid crisis, we had begun to, you know, this used to be a community where nobody locked their doors. When I was growing up, nobody locked their doors and everything was just fine, but not so since the opioid crisis. You know, and then we went there when the opioid crisis was in full swing, and just the hospitality and the love that we were shown there just I think set us at ease, because we felt loved. And I was so afraid that you guys couldn't forgive us for voting for Trump. And it was like forgiveness was almost automatic when we began to talk. And I think when we hear each other's stories, we become, you know, because my heart caught in my throat when Debbie was sharing a few minutes ago about what happened in Germany. And I'm like, oh my God, how could I not have known that? You know, but I've not studied that history deeply. But I promise you I will. But my heart just caught, I was like, oh my God, you know, that's not a part of our experience here. And so I'm sorry that we didn't make that analogy.
Gwen, I wouldn't expect you or anybody else to. I think there are a lot of Americans up here, you know, non-Jewish Americans who wouldn't make that analogy either. It's just that for those of us for who it's really recent history, I mean, this is my parents' experience. It's really recent. I grew up with it. That, you know, and for you to be able to hear it is really wonderful. So there's nothing to forgive. But it's an honor to me that you'd be willing to hear what that felt like to me with my different life story, just like it was so great for me when I was in Kentucky to hear things from all of you about your different life experiences.
I want to pick up some of the wonderful threads that Gwen just wove together. One was the experience of coming from Eastern Kentucky to Western Mass to stay in homes and to feel welcome and trusted. And that was a lesson for people in Massachusetts, that there are places where you really can't trust anyone in your home. And it's another reminder of the devastation of the opioid crisis and what it's done to people's relationships, even in their families. So that's really important to me. And then the part about acceptance and belonging, and how you felt accepted by the community in Massachusetts, and the community in Massachusetts felt accepted by people in Kentucky. And that's so rare in this country when we're so busy dehumanizing each other and rejecting each other. That seemed really important to me also. And I think that's probably one of the things that's happened for us. And then you also talked, the third thing that was really critical for me was about how much we have in common. And I remember other members of our group saying over and over again, oh, we all want the same things. We want the same things for our children, for our families, for our old age, for education, our welfare, care. And because we're seeing each other in such different boxes, we don't get around to what do we have in common.
Right.
And we started with that, which is probably a good place to start.
And over time, one of the things that became more obvious to me is that we're all people who are community activists in our community, building community and helping out neighbors and creating ways for people to get together. And that wasn't the criteria for getting into this, but you know, it really is what we all share. And at the end of that first visit, we were using the word love all the time, and hugging, which of course is what Gwen specializes in. But Gwen, but it felt that way, and you know, when people said to us afterwards, are we getting a next? People said to us, well, are they going to vote for Trump again? Did you change their minds? And I thought one of the things that one of our colleagues used as a phrase is we didn't change any minds, but we changed hearts. And that really spoke very deeply to what my experience was. So I got to stay with Nell, which we have an ongoing relationship for the last 3 years because of that. So it's been wonderful.
Right.
You know, I think the biggest thing, Tom, you made me just think of this. One of the biggest things that happened for me is that instead of, you know, first it was like, oh, this group of Trump voters, you know, are going to come up to Massachusetts. And now it's like it's like me being Jewish or being female. It's just one small, tiny part of my identity. You know, it's like there are all these other things. And so we got to know Nell as a person, or Val as a person, Gwen as a human being. You know, it's like all these great things. And okay, we may have difference of opinion on politics. Okay, I can accept that. You know, not everybody agrees with me about everything all the time. But and then we have this treasure trove of things that we enjoy about each other and are in sync with. So it kind of changed that how you voted wasn't your identity. It's a small piece of many other facets of your identity. And so looking at people that way also, I think, is helpful. We don't categorize them by one single thing.
I could be honest. I want to share that I feel that too. I feel that was really important. We didn't even try, we didn't go in trying to change anybody's minds. We went in trying to learn from each other. And I feel like with you all, I felt like I grew in that understanding and that friendship and that opening my heart. But it's hard still to do that with strangers, with you know, the people out there that are doing terrible things, or the politicians that continue to support. So I'm still working really on how to transfer this experience into relationships with, or not even relationships, encounters, or my opinions of people who think other than me, at least politically or particularly on that realm. So I'm struggling with that. I don't know if anybody has any tips.
Val, how does this sit with you?
Me or
No,
Val?
both of you.
Well, I'd like to, I could say one thing that's been on my heart from the very beginning, and that is how much Hands Across the Hills has changed me. And it was just getting the invitation letter from Jay seemed to be a total paradigm for me, because I was already struggling with having family, my children and siblings, and people that I love and cherish in my life and grieve for when they're sick, and do my best to help when they need me, and all those things. As being someone that was already feeling this strain between us politically, it was very difficult. But that letter helped me to stop and think that it just said, this is about not judging, but understanding. You got to listen to understand. And that really has changed my whole life about all of this stuff. And that being said, I just want to say one more thing around the politics of this. I feel like in my head, and I'm not trying to complicate this conversation any, but in my head, it's nationally throughout this country, the politicians are the people who are benefiting from this great gap that's between all of us. The people that the ones of us that are here, were able to overcome that gap and to sit down and get to know each other. But that is, I think, another way that we need to, that we've got to start looking at this, because I feel like the poor, as we talk about the people of color and the poor of having to struggle and deal with these horrific issues as they move, those numbers are growing every day. The poverty is creeping up every single day and taking great leaps and bounds through this pandemic. And more people are finding themselves in situations where this could get a lot worse if we can't get some attention to Washington, D.C. and people there, that there has to be a change in how they approach our political problems, and that they stop feeding into the frenzy of separation, of separating the people, as I feel like they have. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
Yeah.
needed to say it.
Everyone's head is nodding, so I guess it makes a lot of sense. Belle, do you want to jump in?
Hard to beat what Neil said there, but in following up on this thread, I agree. I was thinking back about Tom and expecting us to come and being prepared for what might come from that. And I confess, when I went, I thought they just don't understand, and we have to go explain it to them and tell them what it's like to live here. And I thought, that we were going to a fairyland where all was good and all was well, and they just needed to know what our situation was, and then it could be better. And I had early on, maybe just even in the introductions of names, going around the circle, I had a wide-eyed opening that, okay, everybody is carrying some burden and stories, and I cannot just look at people and assume that their life is without issues. And Deborah and Stacy in particular, when you talk about your parents' stories, I went to bed on stories of my mom being the 9th child in the head of a holler at Scuttle Hole Gap. And then when I think of you at 15 hours away, going to bed on stories from your family and how those stories impacted me, I assume that you had the same connection there, different, but yeah, that allegiance and loyalty and sadness for what our families went through. Even though there's wonderful stories and wonderful things that they went through also. Also, when someone said the 15 hours away point, there are studies that show the life expectancy and the health here, and that our Congress, that we have the poorest health, education, and yes, it is frustrating to not see that improving at the rate we'd like it to, when you have children that are growing, that are in the 3rd grade now. And but it was a good experience and eye-opening for me to be there too. And I appreciate having been a part of this, and I believe in it, even when things have been hard in this gathering. It hasn't all been easy with the two communities blending, and we all carry, and I particularly carry, you know, chips on my shoulders, or I'm quick to judge. And but even in those hardest of times, I believe in the effort of this and what good can come from listening to and being a part of with others.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because we don't want it to sound like mush. It wasn't that easy, and it's still not easy. And there's still times when we're walking very gently, a little bit on eggshells with each other and being careful. Part of the carefulness is sensitivity, because we know now that each of us gets hurt from stereotypes or generalizations or negative judgments, but also sensitivity because we do have different levels of opportunity. And for us, we don't have to go 15 hours away. We can go 1 hour away to the big cities in our area and see some of the same consequences of inept government policies that you've seen in your area, where there's not enough jobs and there's not an economy that serves all the people, and that the wage gap between the rich and the poor has gotten so vast. So there's a lot, and goes back to what Nell was saying, that it isn't just the change of conversations, but it's taking this change of conversations and applying it politically so that we begin to have some economic and political justice in this country. And because that's what's going to help people feel better. Part of feeling better is to feel loved and concerned and heard from and validated. And part of it is, as Gwen been saying from the beginning, to put food on the table. And if we can't deliver that in our communities, then we're not going to be able to be peaceful with each other, because people are going to struggle because their basic human needs are not being met. So I think we're learning all of this as we keep going together. And we're not done. We're still in conversation.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that's really important, that was really illustrated in our last dialogue group, when I said something that inadvertently offended Gwen, is that we can talk about it. You know, that we're not going to be perfect. We are going to step in it sometimes, but that's okay, because there's enough trust here now that you know, even if it takes a day to process it, we can come back and say, hey, that just didn't sit right. Let's talk about it, you know? And that to me is as best as it can be. You know, that we're not going to be perfect all the time. None of us are. But if we can just, if there's enough trust that we can know that when something happens, or we say something, or something feels off-putting, that the other person will speak up and we can address it. I think that's phenomenal.
Well, it's like what Stacy said about a marriage or a partnership.
Right.
We have a good group
Much stronger.
marriage. You know, in a good group marriage, we can talk to each other. In a good partnership, we can talk to each other. Yeah. Not fearing, and it's going to blow everything out of the water, and we're going to lose that person.
Yeah.
I was also interested earlier when we were talking about perceptions, and Gwen was talking about how the people who were storming the Capitol, some people were saying, well, now there were infiltrators coming in from the left to disturb the right, and there were demonstrations on the left, and the right comes in to infiltrate those, and all those different perceptions. And one of the learnings that I keep having from our work together is how different it is. What you see is so different according to where you stand. And you know, if you're standing this way, you see in this direction. If you're standing that way, you see something totally different. And then we fight because we don't see the same thing, but we're not standing in the same place. We're not coming out of the same experience. And so much of what we see differently is because of where we stand and what we've been brought up with. We don't invent our votes in a vacuum. And that's a big learning for us.
Yeah, when Gwen talked about the people who believe they were infiltrators only, I thought, my God, I've not heard that around here at all. And so there's a whole view and population, you know, that we don't, we heard all the people who were saying, well, the Black Lives Matter protests were infiltrated to cause trouble, but I hadn't heard the other. And so we live in very different worlds in that way.
And we get very different information.
Yep.
I think that's the other point.
That's right.
That's a really important one, because we form our opinions based on our information. So if we're getting different information, we're of course going to come down in different places.
So I want to ask you another question based on my own experience. My own experience with Hands Across the Hills is that not only am I defending my friends in Letcher County, Kentucky, but I'm now also pausing when I hear generalizations about any other kind of people and saying, wait a minute, there's a backstory here. Everybody's hurting in one way or another. And I mean, the acting out of the thing in the Capitol was for some people, as I think was Gwen said earlier, people feeling disenfranchised and unheard and unseen and left out. Well, pay attention to me, and I'll smash if I have to. Pay attention to me, and so much about that is what we're experiencing. That we don't pay attention to people, and we make generalizations. So when I hear someone talking about Trump voters or other kinds of people, I say, wait a minute, slow down. What's the backstory? What's the context of where that vote came from? Who is this person that we're talking about, and trying to bring up the humanization level and tamp down the demonization level? And that's, for me, been a result of our interactions in these past years.
Thanks for saying that, Paul. I think that really speaks to what I was asking before, like how to, and I guess it's just a practice to kind of keep reminding oneself, because it's easy to react, to see something that just makes you afraid or angry, and to be like, those people, like how, they're crazy. But you're right, we have to take a step back and see we're all human. We all have needs and need to belong and to be heard and seen, and that's a really valuable lesson.
Yeah, I would say take a step back to understand that and take a step forward to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe in a sense, all of us coming out of this dialogue are public educators in one way or another. And a dialogue is not just for us. The dialogue has got to be for the larger body around us, for our communities, our regions, our nation. So how do we step up and talk about what we've done and what we're learning in such a way that other people are also not stereotyped?
And we have to admit that it's very hard to get a group like us into the room together. Before we turned to Kentucky, we tried a lot of communities around here, and that was too close for anybody. No way. And I'm not so sure it would be any better today. So it's an interesting process about how you do that. And we've tried some things right here in Leverett where we try to bring together people and hope we're going to get different views. And we don't succeed very well, even when we make specific personal invites to bring, the less progressive people into the room, because there's so many progressives. And it's intimidating, and we are not innocent. I mean, in terms of the attitudes we carry, I heard Stacy say, well, I never wanted to judge you. Well, I can't say that was true for me. I would find an impulse that would say, oh, if I just showed them what they're doing in Greenfield, they'll change the way they're doing it. There's this sort of, and it wasn't a desire to judge as much as it was a desire to help. But with that comes the same condescending Northeast colonial view that we've had. And so it's a very tricky line to walk with good intentions, but even with that. And so getting us in the room and then having a process that feels safe is pretty unique.
It's one reason I was so thrilled, Val, when you got those young people to join us and to do that Zoom. I mean, to bring, and especially their ages, they're like high school students and maybe early college, I don't know. But, that group that are still so open and so interested and so curious about the world and influential and will be the leaders in another decade or so. I think going in that direction is fantastic. I'd love to see us doing more of that.
They enjoyed that too, and I appreciate that challenge from a reminder from Paula that this isn't to just end with us, but to be carried out also. And sometimes when I say things like I don't want to be confrontational, I think of the scenarios of they came for you, for my neighbor, and they did nothing. They came for someone else and I did nothing. They came for someone else and I did nothing. So I don't want to be that person, but I can only act in the parameters and be effective in the parameters that I'm comfortable in and that I think the people around me can be comfortable with. Because I don't want confrontation for the sake of confrontation. I want confrontation for the sake, if confrontation may not even be the right word, if it's for the sake of movement and betterment for all involved. We're looking with Gwen and Nell and taking part of this with us at a community experiment that would work to bring others in and model some of these same behaviors. We're going with a little bit of when we know better, do better. So a day where we will learn something and a day when we will do something. And the first day begins with giving blood, because we've all need blood, and we can all give blood. And then the conversation is going to be about diversity in Appalachia, because there is a big gap in what we were. I think sometimes there was much more diversity than there is now, and where we are. So we want to build on things that we've learned here and use them in the community.
That's wonderful. You're planning something, is what I'm hearing. This is news to us. I'm delighted to hear about it.
Tell her about the plans, Val.
It is follow up to Martin Luther King Day. Cowan, in partnership with others here in the community, part of the Bridge for Unity that Gwen has been involved with, and churches in Gwen's community have had Martin Luther King Day for about 20 years. And they have been very, very, very welcomed, and people who have attended those have very much appreciated that there was an opportunity to publicly share that, come together as community during that day. But we sometimes let it end there. So our commitment this year was that we would have a month, one day a month, that we would work to continue those conversations and are following with the community experience. Gwen brought up the beloved community, but to have to work and invite community to discuss our differences, and just like the skills that we've practiced and learned here, that we could talk about, identify some situations. We don't expect we're going to solve them all, but move the needle a little bit on that. That'll be happening next week.
Awesome.
And we will look for an opportunity to join and invite others from here.
Yes, and please also tell us about it, but talk about being public educators. What's better than that?
That's fantastic.
Community educators.
Very exciting.
That really does take our 3 years of gifts to each other and brings them into our community where they're so needed. And that's a wonderful plan. And I love the diversity in Appalachia thinking around it, bringing that up. We're dealing with diversity here too. This issue doesn't go away, and it's us. Somebody talked before about discomfort. A little bit of discomfort we need. We have a little discomfort with each other, and that pushes us to grow. It's a matter of how you balance it with not being so discomfortable that you either act out or shut down. But yeah, this is wonderful. Gwen, go ahead. Want to say something?
You're muted, Gwen.
You look as if you want to say something, Gwen.
I was just thinking about when we get comfortable. We go home in the evening and we get comfortable in the recliner or reclined on our bed, and it's a time of inactivity. But when we are uncomfortable, that's when we begin to, when we are uncomfortable, that's when we begin to do something.
Right.
We began to move. We began to act.
Yeah.
And so I think the discomfort brings about the growth, and it brings about the action.
Right.
And when we stay in our comfort zone, we're just stoic.
We had been comfortable.
And Gwen, you've been brilliant at bringing up the discomfort and getting us all to grow.
But I think if we had been comfortable the whole time with each other, we wouldn't have learned very much. You know, we needed that little edge, and we still have a little edge. We're still in progress.
Yeah.
And that's a very nice place to end because our time is up. And it's time to close our dialogue and to really honor and appreciate everyone who's been on this for the richness and the joy and the honesty, the integrity. And stay healthy, everybody. Stay well.
Always a joy to be with all of you. Great to see our Kentucky friends.
It is so
Great
good
to
to
see
see
you.
all of your faces.
It is
So good.
great.
Likewise.
Thank you all.
It's just
Thank
so
you.
enriching.
Thank you for everything.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be well.
Love to y'all.
Thanks.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.